Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Bothell Shoreline Board meeting for rescheduled meeting, which is now Monday, 25th, 2019, 6 p.m. All right. So first order of business is to have public comments. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to address the board on a topic not scheduled for a public hearing, this is your opportunity to speak to us. Is there anybody who would like to speak to the board? Seeing none. In my call to order, I should have announced that all or board members are now present, and also glad you could join us, Mr. Mayor. He was our liaison from the council. Glad you can make it tonight. Thanks for coming. So all board members are present, and our liaison, Andy Ram. The next order of business is approval of minutes. I did have a change because it says that I made a motion to adjourn, which I can't do. I do remember asking if there was a motion to adjourn, and then somebody replied with a motion. So Jim Orr seconded. Who? Okay, David Bain will take credit for seconding the motion. So are there any other amendments to the minutes? So a motion would be in order to approve. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by council or board member Gustafson, seconded by board member Orr, to approve the meeting minutes as amended. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, if you would please say, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed, so the motion passes unanimously. I did ask, but I will ask again if there's any public comments. Okay. So the next item is new business. I'll turn the meeting over to this point for David to lead us through the rest of the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Chair and board members. So I didn't have any new business for the agenda, and also we have no public hearing, so we can move directly into the continued study session. And start with the review of mapping changes that we haven't discussed to date. So just as background, in the memo, I did include the 3 mapping changes that we have discussed, the ones that actually are more substantive, that involve either changes in environmental designations or expansions of the shoreline jurisdiction due to new circumstances. Here on the first page of your memo is the Horse Creek situation, where the daylighting of Horse Creek there did the ordinary high water mark for Sammamish River does extend up that new channel and creates the bulb out that you see there, and the portion of it that extends onto Block A, we've designated as a high intensity, as that's a development site. Then this is just a recap of what we've done to date. At the top of the page, on page 2 of the memo, is the Sammamish channel that was added on the opposite side of the river, on the east side of the river, and that extended the ordinary high water mark to that channel, and therefore extended the shoreline jurisdiction. There's no change in environment here, other than the Urban Conservancy environment does extend into the Sammamish River Park land. It doesn't extend into any private land. It extends over the West Sammamish Trail, but those are uses that are allowed in the Urban Conservancy. And then the third one was at Wayne Golf Course, where we the change there the main change was changing the shoreline residential designation on the outer 100 feet of the shoreline jurisdiction on the former Wayne Golf Course property to Urban Conservancy to make that to match the inner 100 feet. And then there's a small extension of an associated wetland along Waynita Creek there in the bottom center part of the picture there. So those we all discussed at the January meeting. And tonight, I just wanted to, and I think this will go fairly quickly, go over other mapping changes. These are mostly minor tweaks, fixing some errors that were made in the kind of merging the mapping that was done during the last update to our GIS database, and in a few cases, and more commonly, since that last update, we have had some new wetland delineations done along the within the shoreline jurisdiction and along the shoreline jurisdiction, which changes the jurisdiction since it does extend to associated wetlands. So in your original packet that you got for February 11th, I didn't have a key map, but Anne brought that to my attention that it would be useful. So here's a key map of these 15 situations, starting at the north, which extends outside of our city limits to our planning area boundary up in unincorporated Snohomish County. So I can bring these up at larger scale and pull up different layers on our COB map if needed, but I'll start with just going through the memo here. And so let me know if you have questions as you go along. Feel free to jump in. Yeah.
One question. First, do you have another packet you could give to Mayor Rehm?
Yeah, there are packets on the back table there.
Okay.
And also a sign-in sheet for anyone who
Okay. And the
would like to be
second
on our email
question
list.
I have is, when are these all instances of either just adjusting the boundary or including wetlands that are in proximity to the shoreline?
Yeah, and including wetlands that would be considered associated wetlands.
That's, I was going to say, they meet the definition of associated wetlands.
Correct.
But there's not been any consideration of anything other than obvious proximity, other than any kind of hydrological connections.
No, this was just a kind of a visual review
That's
of
what
the
I thought.
mapping that we have and trying to identify any little glitches
Okay.
that there may be or updates that might be necessary.
Yeah, we didn't conduct any additional field investigations.
I didn't think
to
so, yeah.
Figure out exact
But it's pretty
boundaries.
much just the proximity issues, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So you did do some field investigation about the other three, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. So the one on the top is just purely a mapping issue that when we got up to the planning area boundary, there were some glitches with the I've got to figure out the pointer here if I can. No, it's not. With the 200-foot boundary, that little yellow leg that extends off to the left, to the west, doesn't follow a 200-foot boundary, and then otherwise some of the boundaries don't quite match the planning area. They should stop at our planning area and not extend into outside of our planning area, and they should fill up our planning area and not. So that's just a minor mapping change. Then number 2 is another one where I just noticed that the boundaries really should be following North Creek through that area. They approximately follow North Creek. They perhaps followed an earlier path of North Creek that could have changed, and it's a minor thing, but and it applies not just to the shoreline jurisdiction, but sub-area boundaries.
David,
Yes.
will we get to see a before and after?
Yes, we don't, we just,
Okay. We just
in
haven't
this
done it yet.
case, for the other three that we looked at in January, the more substantive changes, we did the before and after. We haven't done that yet
Mm-hmm. Just to
for
make sure I
these.
know I'm
Yeah.
looking at.
So
Thank
this
you.
is more kind of a heads up. These are some changes that you will be seeing, and the plan is to have them all ready to present for the March 11th open house.
So are these then the before snapshot or the
These are,
after?
these are the current,
This
is the current situation,
And if we did want to actually go look at these, are they available online, the GIS maps, or is it just a?
They are, and,
staff?
well, if there are some that you want to look at in more detail, I can do it, I can break away and do it now, or when I'm done, I can go back and show you where to find those online and how to kind of take a look at them
would be great.
online in more detail. So number 3, this, it's not really clear. I don't think this is a new wetland delineation, but the shoreline boundaries just don't quite follow the wetland boundary. This is an associated wetland up again in the Snohomish County portion of the city. Number 4 is another case where the zoning boundary, which I think is intended to be North Creek, doesn't quite coincide. And in fact, there are two, I guess you would say, two main channels of North Creek. One which doesn't connect, the one that's labeled there doesn't actually connect through to the one that extends up into Snohomish County. So that is something that we probably don't need to bother with, but we might want to adjust the zoning boundary to follow North Creek. That's actually not really even a shoreline issue that in this case, but just one of the issues that we noticed as we went through this. So number 5 is sort of a textbook example of where we've had some new wetland delineations that don't. So the shoreline designation matches the previous wetland delineation. So the green areas are the shoreline designation and former wetland outline, and the bluish area that extends with the cross-hatching is the new delineation. So in this case, it's just a matter of adjusting the shoreline boundary to match the associated wetlands. And some of the boundary there may be within that 200-foot buffer as well, so we wouldn't change that. We would just change the areas outside the 200-foot buffer that to match the new delineation. 6 is similar. There's some associated wetlands that extend outside the shoreline, the red shoreline jurisdiction boundary that should be part of that. The light blue areas without the cross-hatching, those are ponds, which are not technically considered wetlands and are not part of the shoreline jurisdiction. It's somewhat moot in this area because none of that area is going to, between those shoreline areas wetland areas is going to be developed. And this is just south of 214th and east of 527 in Canyon Park.
Dave, could you
Sure.
identify the one up above, the green one? Is
Oh.
is that the parklands?
No, it's southwest of Centennial Park.
Okay.
It's south of 214th and just a short distance west of 527.
And is the green then natural?
It's natural environment designation.
And then this orange color is the Urban Conservancy? I'm trying to figure out your coloring. No, I think Urban Conservancy is yellow.
Yeah, let's look at that on the when
Look
I
on the
can,
big one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that one doesn't, I don't believe would change, but unless that wetland that comes close to it would be should be considered an associated wetland and an extension of it. So we'll take a closer look at that. Good catch. Number 7 is another area where we have, and this is probably to me, it looks like a mapping error, or it's just where a wetland delineation was done on that parcel, and the previous delineations didn't extend onto that parcel. So occasionally you'll see areas like that where it seems like a wetland should extend, and it's just a situation where the delineation was done for a limited number of parcels, and usually when you look at our mapping where you see wetlands that are kind of bulbous shaped, those are based on the data we have on contours and other data that we have. So they're kind of best guesses. Where you get the more angular delineations, that's where they've actually been surveyed, and typically, that's kind of a rule of thumb. Number 8, this is again, I believe these are some new delineations that should be taken into account. And there may be some cases here where we'll have to make some best guesses based on the data that we have for areas that haven't been delineated. And that may be exactly what's happened here, although there's one area where we've got a wetland that's not shown as an associated wetland, so I assume that's new. So our GIS department is doing some research on exactly when these delineations got added to our database so that we can make sure that they are, in fact, delineations that have been done since 2015. Number 9 is a very minor one where the shorelines boundary extends slightly beyond the associated wetlands, and it's not within the 200-foot radius. So again, probably just a mapping registration error. Number 10, along the east side of the UW Bothell Cascadia College wetland area, there are some wetlands, a strip of wetlands that aren't included in the jurisdiction that should. And then let's see.
Yeah, those are, fairly extensive.
Yeah.
And they weren't on there?
For some reason, they're not shown as part of that natural environment in the shoreline jurisdiction. So
Pieces of it, not the whole thing.
Just the part that shows as blue on this image, bluish crosshatch. I was thinking there was one other thing here, but I guess maybe it's the next one. This is over, number 11 is behind Home Depot. There's a wetland there. Again, the boundaries on the map of the wetland don't quite match our shoreline jurisdiction associated wetlands. And below, a very minor discrepancy in that the little blue wedge of a triangle adjacent to the shoreline, two shoreline designations, should be a continuation of those. This is the west, along the West Riverside Trail or West Riverside Drive and Trail. There are a couple of small wetlands along the trail there, and some of them appear to be connected to the shoreline jurisdiction with streams. At least one of them does. So that's one. I don't know if that's going to require a little bit of field work to determine whether those should be considered associated wetlands. This is 13. Let me use my pointer. This little one here is connected with a stream, at least on the map. This one is not, but so they're close. And then number 14 is in Blythe Park. This is a newly delineated wetland, this boomerang shape, which should be an extension of the shoreline jurisdiction. That was I believe was part of the delineations that were done with the when the golf course was purchased. And we looked at some of those others. And then number 15, this is on the Bothell-Kenmore border. We show some of our shoreline jurisdictions extending into Kenmore, and so that's just another minor mapping error that needs to be rectified. So that is the extent of those mapping issues. And I'll show you now. Let me escape out of this. And so if you go on the City of Bothell website and under City Services, you can select, oh, come on. Show me how it's done. Okay, I'm gonna just have to redo it. Scroll down under Maps and GIS, you select City Interactive Maps, and then Cobb Map. And that'll give you, it'll open up in a little while. In the meantime, I'll go to this one. Here I've turned on a couple of different layers. I've turned on under Planning. When you open it up, the planning layer is not turned on, so you have to click on that little box. And then I turned off the zoning and sub-area boundaries because they didn't really apply, but I turned on the shoreline designation. So that's all of this, the colored area here, including Swamp Creek, which we're really not looking at this round. It's the portion that's in our MUGA, our potential annexation area in Snohomish County between Bothell and Briar. And then I turned on the imagery. If you click on the imagery, it automatically picks up the most recent ortho photo. So I'm trying to remember which was the area, and then you can zoom in. When you open it up, I believe automatically it does pull up wetlands. And although I'm not seeing them now. Oh yeah, so they're showing up here. So one area that I showed it, that we were asking about was,
Yeah.
Oh, so one layer that probably isn't very useful is in our property and land area. There's a category called landmarks, and I think we should find a different name for it because it has nothing to do with historic landmarks. It's things like apartment complexes and other. So that brownish area that you were asking about, Anne, was that apartment complex, and so it wouldn't have any bearing on the wetland next to it.
Do you remember which number it was again?
It's one of the early ones.
Unless it's too far down. I think it's 5.
Yeah. The other thing you can do is you're looking at this, and I did for the images, you can, for each category here, you can adjust the opacity. So if you want to be able to see through it a little bit better, you just turn that down, and it reduces the density of the coloring. So are there any questions about any of those other areas or other areas you'd like to take a closer look at on the comm map?
I want to look at that one down across from the university again.
Okay. And then
Towards further down, I think I know exactly what it is. I think it's number 3.
oh yeah, turn on your mics when you're
Thank you.
okay. There we go. So here, what jumped out at me was this blue strip here that's seems pretty clear is just a continuation of the contributing wetlands along North Creek there that should be a part of that natural environment. I can't think of any reason it wouldn't be Can you, Amy?
No.
No, okay.
And they did adjust the stream some, so that probably is why it hadn't picked up before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It appears that there's a line here. I'm not sure what that line is, but it follows that line for a stretch of it. So anyway, it's one of those little mapping glitches that we have many of them, and as we come across them, we try to clean them up. But this, like most of the other ones, are fairly minor. They don't have any. They're not really the result of new conditions, other than in some cases they're the result of new shoreline delineations, but they're not actual new conditions on the ground, like the Horse Creek daylighting or the purchase of the Wayne Golf Course. They're almost like Scrivener's errors that we're dealing with in a mapping sense.
Dave, while you're here, the wetland behind Home Depot, is that just an updated? Because that's going to reduce in size. Is that what I'm understanding?
That would be that's what it appears to be the case, and I haven't gotten the word from GIS about when that might have happened. You would think that would have been delineated when they built the Home Depot, but yeah.
It was delineated. I remember looking at it, yeah.
So it's possible that they were looking into doing some expansion that would have required them to redo the delineation, and so this may be a more recent delineation. But I just don't have that answer for you just yet.
Yeah, that may also be a physical change where there was an open channel of water there that may be in a pipe now. So that may have dried out some of that wetland.
And in our ultimate report, we will have all those reasons for these changes. If they are the result of newer wetland delineations, we'll identify when those were done.
And it's also important to note that even with our best efforts to update wetlands now, if there's ever any proposal again near or in these areas, they'd have to do a new wetland delineation, make a project-specific, site-specific determination of jurisdiction, and then carry on. So this map is always going to be the best until someone does a delineation again, if whatever this is based on is expired. So. And in some cases, yeah, areas have gotten bigger, some have gotten smaller, and in some cases, depending on some obvious aerial photo signatures of wetlands, then we sort of adapted the existing or the latest delineation with the aerial photo and come up with what we think is biologically our best professional guess of how it really works. But again, delineation at the project level is going to be critical to figuring out exactly where jurisdiction is for any project.
So in other words, these delineations are, and the mapping of them is fluid in both the figurative and literal sense.
Dave, on detail number 14 for the Blythe Park, it looks like there's aquatic territory overlaying both Urban Conservancy and the shoreline residential. Number 14.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's either going to be one or the other. It's not going to be both at the same time.
Okay, I'm sorry. Which are you?
Yes, that boomerang cuts into the Urban Conservancy designation.
Uh-huh.
And that blue, what does it represent? It represents aquatic.
This
okay.
This blue with the green cross-hatching is a wetland.
Okay.
And so that will all get colored with the orange overlay. Since it's clearly contributing wetlands. So.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Same thing here. I didn't highlight this one before, but that little bulb out would also be an extension. And then we already talked about on Blythe, or I mean on the Wayne property, this one would be an extension as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we?
Yeah, at the Boomerang, that little island of not wetland in the middle, will that be left as non-shoreline jurisdiction, or would you just fill in the gap? Or is that an option too?
Yeah, it'll be left open because by definition, we can only say what shoreline jurisdiction is if it meets the definition. So sometimes you end up with weird little islands of not jurisdiction surrounded by jurisdiction.
Right, outside of 200 feet, outside of
Right,
wetlands?
once you're
Okay,
beyond floodway and all that sort of, those other minimum requirements.
thank you.
Now, as you get into this Cobb map, you'll find that there are, every time there's a plus, it means you can get at more layers. So there's a wetland buffer layer. So in terms of practically what you can do with that piece, it's within the buffer, so it's not, nothing really can happen there that, well, just the few minor things that could happen in a wetland buffer, perhaps a trail, but
Just a point of clarification again, was that part of Blythe Park and then it was delineated again, or is that part of the new purchase?
no, that's been part of Blythe Park. I believe that when they did the wetland delineation for the new purchase, they also extended to update their mapping in Blythe Park. I'm not 100% positive about that, but we'll also specify that in the report.
Okay, can you show us Wayne again? Okay, there's some wetlands that are currently not connected, and then
Like
some of
these?
the, well, I was thinking down in the lower right corner. Yeah, so that one and the ones to the right, or actually the ones to the right are the one I'm interested in. In some of the grants we submitted, we talked about reconnecting those wetlands to Waynita Creek. And if that gets done, do they become part of the shoreline area because they're associated with the river then? So it's not an issue for this round, but thinking going forward as the area gets restored, if instead of having, the golf course between the creek and those wetlands, if they're allowed to reconnect, does that extend the shoreline jurisdiction up into those wetlands?
It depends. And we didn't try and tease out, and this is where I think field work would be helpful, but at some point when you topographically start heading up a slope and away from the shoreline jurisdiction horizontally and vertically, then you have to ask yourself the question about what the relationship is to the shoreline jurisdiction. Is it sort of a two-way street, or is it just that the water body or the wetland drains in one direction only to the shoreline? Otherwise, I mean, shoreline jurisdiction would snowball into the entire city if you picked up every wetland that just drained ultimately to the river or to the creek. So my guess is that those wouldn't. Further up Waynita Creek, that one may. I think that would just really have to be figured out at a project-specific, site-specific level to figure out if that does. And then same question for anything that is tributary to it. But I didn't want to start making those kinds of judgments because those aerial photos really aren't the way to do that.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think those are connected now, so for this round,
Yeah.
it's irrelevant, but just trying to understand going forward what we're getting ourselves into.
The formal definition for wetlands under 173.22.030 is that associated wetlands means those wetlands which are in proximity to, which is what we're looking at now, and either influence or are influenced by tidal waters or stream, and then therefore are subject to the SMA. So it is an either or. It is not both and. So the wetlands can influence the stream, or the stream can influence the wetlands. So it's either influence or are influenced by.
And I think there's devil in the details in terms of what it means to influence. And once you're just simply contributing water and don't have a lot of interaction with other kinds of functions, wildlife-wise or other things, then it becomes a bit of a judgment call at some point. But so yeah, those may or they may not be, and you'd probably have to look more carefully at the site to figure that out in the future.
Yeah, I think in Waynita Creek, where the wetland on the creek is, there have been coho salmon up in that area, so that may be one where there is that, fish connection between the river and the stream, but
And that
that's
wouldn't
not
be
presently the case on the right.
and that wouldn't be enough, because again, you'd end up snowballing and picking up every stream that had fish passage that was a tributary to a shoreline water body would its wetlands would become jurisdiction, and that isn't the case. So there's a broad gray area, and then a firm no and a firm yes, and we didn't want to wander into the broad gray area too far with our mapping, because there's implications for mapping things and people wondering how you got there and what does it mean for their property and property rights and all that sort of stuff. So we wanted to be sensitive to that and then just use our best professional judgment based on the tools we have and without going out there.
So I'm going to go back to the packet. If there, well, at least if there are no other questions on that, and then move in kind of what I consider the meatier part of tonight's discussion was was trying to resolve one of the last issues that we had in terms of the code amendments. And that had to do with the compensatory mitigation measures. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy to talk you through this, these two options that she's presented, the one that you've looked at before and a new option to consider.
So the first option is just our very original proposal that we first brought to you. And then the second option, which starts on page 2 of attachment 2, reflects the input that we received at several meetings ago, really wanting to restrain mitigation for impacts that occur in the city of Bothell to the drainage basin in which it occurs at the very least. So I've just rearranged and re-emphasized a few things in the language to try and address that, leading off with just basic preference for in-kind and on-site to some degree, and then being a lot clearer, I think, that off-site mitigation is only allowed in these certain circumstances, and even when it is allowed, that off-site mitigation must be within the same drainage basin. And we don't provide any kind of exit strategies for, and not in the same drainage basin if XYZ, so it just pretty much a hard line stops it. And then I think the property owner, if he or she has a particular proposal, would just really have to do their due diligence, figuring out if they are not any available in lieu fee or mitigation banks that are in the same sub-drainage basin, then they'll just have to look at properties that are for sale, or look at their site more carefully, or change their proposed development, or some other way to either eliminate the impacts or find another in-drainage basin solution to complete their mitigation.
I have a couple of comments. First of all, I would say there are not 2 options, but 3. And so I want to remind the board, and I brought copies of our September 20th meeting, where we looked at this first draft, so I'll pass these around. I think I got enough for staff. A couple extras. Yeah. That we do not need to make any change. And that was on the chart that was presented to us on September 20th. It says, recommend adding ecology suggested language. No, it says no change needed. Excuse me, I'm in the wrong one. It's where the question marks are there. I scribbled on it at the meeting. So it says under mitigation banks are already addressed in BMC. No change needed. However, so this means that we're adopting the rule for certifying wetland mitigation banks. No change needed. However, consider broadening the in lieu fee program regulation to allow use of King County's program. So that was the recommendation, that was the thought that we were to be pursuing by changing just one word in what would be what was considered the first option, which was to change that word from sponsored to approved, because there is no sponsored in lieu program. However, as Amy pointed out to us in the following meeting, the nearest in lieu bank or in lieu site from King County is over in Little Bear Creek Basin, east of Woodinville and unincorporated King County. So that would not, certainly wouldn't meet the idea of having something that was either on-site or in the same sub-basin. So I have looked at this other second option, and I find it not satisfactory at all, because there's too many words that are what I call squiggly words. Here, David nodding. Some of these refer to things like whether the city of Bothell has certain goals, and whether we've got something is ecologically preferable and so forth. And it's this second definition just doesn't do anything at all to tighten it up. So I'm looking at your number 4, option 2. Said if it will best meet watershed goals formally identified by the city. There are no watershed goals formally identified by the city. And it goes on to talk about adding in wording that off-site mitigation is ecologically preferable. So I don't know what that terminology, how you would define something like that. So my preference, and I will make a motion to that effect at the proper time after we've discussed it, or I can make it now, is that we leave the wording as, I'm going to discuss it and outline it, leave the wording as it is now, as sponsored. And the reason for doing this is that this is consistent with the Shoreline Master Program policies. And the Shoreline Master Program policies are very strong for conserving the wetlands in the shoreline jurisdiction. If you look at all of these, there's at least 3 policies, and I can go through them if you would like me to, that would not speak to going out of the off-site at all, certainly off-site or adjacent, but not out of the sub-basin. So my proposal will be, and I can make a formal motion at the proper time, would be leave the wording as it is, but that we opt to come back and look at this, and in 2020, when, as we'll talk about later, we will be looking at the buffer reduction issue. And on the flip side of the paper that I sent to you, I just copied out this overview of the in lieu fee mitigation from King County. Doesn't tell us a lot, but it gives us a little bit. So I would like to look into what is really, I want to know what the difference is between a mitigation bank and an in lieu fee program, because I dealt with mitigation banks many years ago and knew a lot about them, but we really weren't talking about in fee lieu then. And so I did work on some of the early work that was done for King County on this, but I've been out of touch with it for many years now. So that I would like to see more information on it, yeah.
Okay, just to clarify, Ann, you're saying option 1 without the approved to sponsored change.
Exactly. That is what I would suggest, and that would be consistent with what it says here is there's no change needed. That is, we've already met the change by doing the mitigation banks. So there's no change needed, but that we do go back and look at it and see if there is some wording that would give us some option should there be an in-fee lieu program that would meet some good criteria. Yeah. So I'm not opposed to it. I just think we need to look at it more.
And if I understand you correctly, what we're saying is that at the moment, there are no City of Bothell sponsored programs, so no mitigation programs are currently eligible to be used by anybody because they're not sponsored by the City of Bothell.
No, it's no in-fee lieu
Okay.
mitigation program. You can do mitigation, and you can do mitigation banking, because that's in the code
Okay.
already.
Yes.
But the in-fee lieu, there is no sponsored Bothell program.
Okay.
And the only King County one, according to Amy, is out on the east side of Woodinville, an unincorporated area near the Little Bear Creek Basin.
Okay.
That would be the nearest one.
Okay. So your wording would prevent use of that King County program because it's not
It would
sponsored.
prevent use of that one out, the only one that's
Right.
in, anywhere near us. Yes, that's what it would prevent at this time. But I would like to go back and look at it.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
let me just take control of the meeting for a moment. My role is to kind of try to keep order, so I haven't had to do this, but I'm going to start tonight, is that I asked to be recognized, and then I can kind of let the conversation go back and forth and whatnot. So I see staff has been anxiously wanting to weigh in here, so I'd like to give them the opportunity.
Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that Anna's absolutely right, that the do nothing option is always an option. So we provided two options for changes, but doing nothing is also an option. And then second, Ann raised a lot of questions and issues, and we do have an expert here. And so either now or as others weigh in, I'd like to give Amy a chance to respond to some of those issues.
Go ahead, I think it'd be good to hear.
Okay. So I just wanted to clarify that the no change option still leaves in place mitigation banking, which is outside of the sub-drainage basin, outside of the City of Bothell. It would arguably close off the door to the in lieu fee program currently. I should mention that currently the in lieu fee program has a closest site, which I believe is in Woodinville, as you described, but they are always looking for ways to add to their inventory of sites. And so I think we'd want to leave the door open to them establishing a in lieu fee site within the city and within some of the drainage basins. So I wouldn't want to shut that door completely because there is a good chance that they could find an opportunity in the city, particularly I think if the city, citizens in the city or the city itself were, are proactive in reaching out to the county and suggesting some sites. And the county had told me that they're very interested in working with jurisdictions to get more sites. So that's another option. If you leave it as is, there's also other out of drainage basin opportunities that could be explored in these rules as well. So there's mitigation banks, there's in lieu fee, and then there's just sort of other applicant conceived opportunities where if they have another piece of property and they could make an argument to do mitigation there and it wasn't in the same drainage basin, then they would be allowed to do that under these existing rules as well. So the option 2 has some language in it that I've adapted from Department of Ecology's sort of intro to this companion section in their model code. And by watershed goals, I was thinking about things that are already in your shoreline restoration plan, where it talks about, and I think in your comp plan, it talks about coordination and consistency and sort of following along with the WIRA 8 salmon conservation objectives. And so that's what was in my mind, thinking about watershed goals. that are adopted by the city would sort of be the city's being a partner in the whole watershed, the YRA 8 efforts and those types of things. So that was that thought, and I think we could easily clarify that. It also says on the back side of the page that off-site locations may include state-certified mitigation banks, federally certified fee and lieu programs, applicant-owned properties, or public properties subject to agreement with the city. But in all cases, the bank or mitigation site shall be in the same sub-drainage basin, period, which I think is pretty, like, I don't think it's very wiggly or provides too many opportunities for someone to bypass the intent of the board and keeping all the mitigation in the same drainage basin. So those were my thoughts on that, I think, in a nutshell.
Okay, so I heard in the discussion something that is jumping forward in our agenda a little bit, but I heard talk about the 2020 docket. So the commission or the board had recommended the council put this on the 2019 docket. And council had a meeting that, because our last meeting was canceled, we didn't have a time to take a formal vote, but the council did discuss this. And I didn't hear the report of that, so now that the mayor is here, I would like to hear a report of that discussion, and are we indeed going to be taking this up on the 2012 docket, or 2020?
So just so you guys know, my intentions here are typically not to speak, but it is, you're asking about council reports, so I'll throw that out there for you. I don't want to give my advice or input or anything. It's your guys' board, so I'm just here to basically as a liaison. If you have questions you wanted to ask the council, I'll bring it back to them, that type of thing. But yeah, on last Tuesday we did take this up. We took up the entirety of the 2019-2020 planning docket. We, in the staff report, it said to bring this up, this specific issue up in 2025. And as a council, we wanted to see it sooner than that. One of the struggles really being on council and doing the planning docket is that there's a lot of competing needs, and there was a lot of stuff in the 1920 docket, and basically nothing that we felt as a council. I don't think that there was anything on that list that we wanted to bump. But so we of course added more work than the planning department can handle and moved from 2025 to 2020 the looking at the 1306, I think it is. Is it BMC 1306?
Yes. Yeah. Or 13.13.
1313.
And would the planning or the shoreline board have a role in that process then? Because we're currently scheduled to basically disband, right?
Well, if council had initiated this for 2019, then it would have made sense for the shoreline board to continue on and once they get through the June 30th deadline on the update, tackle that issue. Given that council did defer it to next year's docket, then it'll be discussed, brought back to council for consideration in 2020, and with all of the other projects that are on the docket, then we'll ask them again, is this something you want to tackle this year, which would be next year. But I did want to also clarify a few things, because in the discussion of this, both at the January shoreline meeting and the council discussions last week, there were a lot of statements made, and I wanted to set the record straight on a couple of things here, and I did that a little bit in the memo. The one tweak I made to the memo between the February 11th one and this week was at the bottom of page 3 and extending onto page 4. And this is mostly just to set the record straight, and this would be part of the presentation in the 2020 docket when we bring it back. The Securite Glen Club project has been given as an example of reduced buffers. They did, in fact, propose reduced buffers initially, but that was not approved by ecology, and the ultimate plan that they did not reduce the buffers. It maintained the 100-foot buffer, and because it was a conditional, they also needed a conditional use permit. That gave us leverage to essentially require, well, they came back to us with a proposal to stay out of the buffer and to restore that buffer. So that's what was actually approved and what will be inspected at completion, and to make sure that that's what was done. And then there were also questions raised about the maintenance and monitoring of that. This project has a 10-year landscape maintenance bond associated with it. So the idea is that in that time, those plantings should be well established, and then there's no scheduled maintenance or monitoring beyond that. Another comment that was made at the council meeting was that there were numerous trees that were removed. The trees that were removed, at least that were approved for removal in the plan, were all in the building footprint or immediately adjacent to the building footprint. None of the trees within the 100-foot buffer were to be removed in the approved plan. Any trees that were designated to be retained, if they were not, will need to be replaced at a 3-to-1 ratio. So that's kind of the situation for Securite. And when we brought this to council last week, we didn't include the report that Amy did about all of the discussions that went on with ecology about why we, in the last shoreline update, we did adopt these alternative requirements for reduced buffers in exchange for enhancing degraded buffers in situations where they otherwise we wouldn't have had a handle, any leverage to require that. So that will, we've now been told to bring it back in 2020, and we'll bring the full slate of information to council in 2020.
So trying to back up the meeting to where we were then when we started down this other path. So just to clarify again, the Shoreline Board, we're scheduled to be done with our work in June, and we won't be, council hasn't asked the Shoreline Board to take a look at this issue. In other words, if we want to participate in the discussion, we can as private citizens when it comes back to the council.
I think that there is going to have to be some decision made on whether it makes sense to kind of put the board on hold, rather than disbanding it, just say, let's keep the board assembled until council hears the 2020 docket, and then have a board ready to work on it if they do do that. And then, of course, at that point, they could add other things like compensatory mitigation to that docket at that point. That's within the realm of possibility.
Okay, thank you. So then, all right, so I see Ann wants to be recognized and David. So Ann, why don't you go ahead, because you started this.
A couple of questions with this. One is, I think I saw on the city's website that the terms that we were pointing for were to 2023. So I didn't know if that figured in with it, into the picture, as to whether or not we would consider the buffer reduction, because the terms of our appointment were to 2023 or not. So that's one thing. Certainly, we don't need to meet regularly if there's nothing to discuss, but if that is something that the council would choose to hand to the Shoreline Board, I don't remember when we were appointed exactly what was said, but that's at least what it says on the city website. It's 2023. The second question I have regarding this maintenance issue, and I'm glad that Ryan brought that issue up so we were clear about it, is I see often on a wetland mitigation plan where there is a statement that there will be replacement for 2 years or 3 years of any plants that die. But is that then different than a maintenance issue? Does maintenance necessarily involve replanting? So that, I think, is a distinction that could be made between just ongoing maintenance, keeping what's there that's still alive after 3 years versus actual replacement. So,
Go ahead, Amy.
I think during the formal monitoring period, maintenance would include, and typically it's the first year where you're held to 100% plant survival, and that's kind of a contractor warranty period. And then depending on how the performance standards are set up, you might have another 2 or 3 years where your performance standard has to do with like individual plant survival. And then at a certain point, whether it's year 2 or often year 3, you'll start switching to having percent cover standards instead, because then it becomes difficult to count each plant when it's a thicket. In which case, depending on what the performance standards are again and how well they're doing, there is very commonly some supplementary plantings that might be recommended during the duration of the required monitoring period in order to meet those percent cover goals. Once the percent survival standard has kind of been met, put aside, and then it moves on to percent cover. So if for some reason you replaced all your plants in year 1 for some reason, and you had a 80% survival requirement is typical for the 2nd and 3rd year, but you had an 80% cover requirement in year 5 and you only had 60% cover, then typically the recommendation would be, hey, we need 100 more Doug fir, cottonwood, or whatever, and then they would have to install those, and then they would become part of the remainder of the monitoring period. Would also be subject to percent cover. But after the formal monitoring period, I think it's a good question what maintenance means. And I would assume it has to do with, excuse me, control of invasive species and that sort of thing. And I imagine if there were a die-off that presumably replanting would be part of that, because I think they'd have to maintain the approved condition, which is X% cover of native species. So I'm not sure how that actually works itself out in practice.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Okay, do we get to make recommendations, like ask the city to negotiate with King County to establish in lieu fee mitigation areas within Bothell? For example, you know, it would be nice to do a lot of restoration work on the former Wayne Golf Course, and if King County set up an in lieu fee program to do that, then it may be those projects out in Woodinville could, you know, help fund what's happening in Bothell rather than what's happening in Bothell funding what's out in Woodinville.
Right. I think that's a great idea. Did staff or council discuss that?
No, that wasn't part of the proposal. I think that's something that Ann brought up today, that could be part of that, also be considered in 2020. So that is, there will be an opportunity to make recommendations for the 2020, additional recommendations for the 2020 docket.
Okay, so there's several people who've had their hands up. We're going to go next to Amy, or Sarah.
Well, I think Brian had his hand up first.
Okay.
Amy touched on it. My main concern with the maintenance was the keeping the mortality rates down and the invasives out, and you touched on that, so thank you.
Sarah?
I have 2 questions. The first regarding this subject is everything sounds great about the standards. I just don't see in the plan who will actually go out and verify that those standards are met. In the current language, it just says will be monitored and a report will be submitted. I don't see any inspection or independent verification.
Which section?
I'm referring to 131310. It's on,
Oh, in the reference one.
yes, in attachment 4 to our memo.
You're referring to the existing code requirements.
Yes.
And it talks about a protocol shall be included outlining the schedule for site monitoring and how the monitoring data will be evaluated to determine if the performance standards are being met. Typically what happens, and although it's not completely clear that that's what's supposed to happen, is that the project applicant's required to get a consultant under contract for the duration of the monitoring. And then the consultant would be submitting those annual reports. And I think typically the city planner or enforcement or some entity at the city then reviews those annually submitted monitoring reports and then takes action on those as needed.
And I would just add that if we don't have someone on staff, if it's complex enough, we do have a third-party consultant that we call on to review those.
Okay, so thank you for that. Is there anybody actually physically out there checking it, or is it all reliant on the word of a third party?
So the consultant's applicant prepares a report and submits it, and then I think then the city or their third-party reviewer would, I imagine, I don't know actually, go out.
Yeah, if it's something very straightforward that city staff can do, we do that. If it's more complex, then we have our third-party consultant go out and verify the applicant's consultant work.
Particularly since there's a performance bond, in this case, hitched to it, then I think there's, I think built into that is a lot more obligation on the city's part to review and determine whether the bond is released and whatever the schedule is for that, if it's phased over multiple years or if it's released at the end of the 10-year period. So I think there's a number of mechanisms sort of built in to ensure that the applicant's consultant does a good job with the monitoring report and that there's follow-up on the city side to assess whether that monitoring report is adequate and correct.
And then the bond, if they walk away and don't do the work that's required, then the bond is used to actually do that work. That's the idea of the bond, that it's adequate to actually do the work that's required.
Ann, do you still want to, you have your
I
light
think
on?
David did you do yours? Okay. Okay. Actually, I was trying to find out what page you were on.
Oh,
I got it. I found it.
Okay, so we've heard some discussion of when it's appropriate to make the motion. And so we do have people who want some language changes. My preference would be to not start making motions until it's really getting close to the end, because it gets really clunky to backtrack or amend the motions and whatnot. So I'd like to hold off on making formal motions until it really makes sense. David, when would it make sense? I mean, because the motions do give staff direction to know for sure which direction the board is heading on an issue. So what are your thoughts on when we should start making motions? And are we that close yet? Or
So just in terms of where the conversation has gone to, it's kind of gone to the back to the compensatory, to the buffer reduction and maintenance. That's really not on the table tonight. I was just reporting on what council had done. So on the compensatory mitigation issue, essentially we do have three options: do nothing, option 1, and option 2. Again, we crafted option 2 based on the feedback that we got at previous meetings, but I don't. It's really the motion can actually help inform the discussion, or at least move the discussion forward in one direction or another. So I don't have any qualms about the board taking this on.
But let's at least get through the rest of the material if we haven't, so that we can at least have a discussion on all the issues. Then we can come back to trying to define where we stand.
Patrick, I guess I have one last question on this issue. I guess my question, Amy, would be if we leave it as sponsored, I mean, the whole idea around option 2 was to try and provide structure but flexibility for future change. Does sponsored give us that same level of flexibility that the council can then sponsor something and adopt something without a change subsequently to the shoreline management needed if we leave the sponsored term in rather than approved?
I think it kind of depends on how your own staff and council maybe interpret sponsored versus approved, because it's neither term is defined, as I understand it. So I think it still has flexibility. Approved gives you more flexibility than sponsored, because I think there's definitely a stronger connotation to sponsored, that you've actively like developed it or something, versus approved is a little bit less so and implies more so that you could be saying, yes, I like King County's program or whatever. I think it'd be a simpler process if you were working with the word approved than sponsored in terms of more flexibility. But again, I think maybe that's a kind of a staff interpretation question.
Yeah, and I would say that the sponsor definitely limits our flexibility and wouldn't give us the opportunity if Woodinville or Kenmore or Briar came up with a suitable site within a sub-basin immediately adjacent to our borders to use that, unless Bothell was actually actively involved in actually sponsoring that. So the idea, and I think the language that Amy came up with, provided a lot more direction on what those offsite locations could be, and limits it. But just leaving the language as it is wouldn't give us a lot of flexibility. I guess the only flexibility would be that if Bothell got engaged in some other program and became a co-sponsor, then we could probably use that provision.
I think that clarifies a lot. I would say, I think from all the nods I've seen across the board, that we would like to push staff to investigate using, reaching out to King County as using part of Wayne's. Anybody who played the front nine of Wayne's golf course knows that's halfway to a wetlands already. So
can I just on that one? So that is a possibility down the road, but it's going to be quite some time before that's going to happen, and nothing in this, of course, precludes that, or precludes the possibility that if we do establish a wetland mitigation bank on that property, that other jurisdictions could also direct offsite mitigation funds to that. But these things do take a long time to set up, and I think that's why ecology has encouraged jurisdictions to provide that flexibility, because they've put the state and county have put a lot of work into establishing these programs, and these barriers to using them or they see these as potential barriers to using them.
Ann, go ahead.
I can't see through Sarah. Sorry.
Go ahead, Ann.
Thank you. Okay. I stand by my original, I will make a motion at the proper time, but I want to say one more thing about this second option. While it's true that Amy has tightened up the language regarding the off-site locations, the language regarding in-kind, out-of-kind replacement of wetland type or functions has been considerably broadened. And that concerns me also greatly. So if you look at the new language under section 4, it says that compensatory mitigation, that means that you're not just enhancing, you're actually compensating for the mitigation. should be a functional equivalency improvement of functions in kind. Out-of-kind replacement of wetland type or functions may be allowed if it will meet watershed goals formally adopted by the city. And then it goes on to talk about this ecologically preferable. So that's another major concern that I have with this second language, because out of kind, what that means for wetlands, for example, if it's a forested wetland, and that forested wetland obviously is performing certain functions for the wetland, particularly water quality, slowing water, and so forth. Then according to this language, if the city had another kind of watershed goal, or somebody thought something was ecologically preferable, so they thought it was better to have a wildlife corridor than a forested wetland, you could do it. And this is an issue that is of high importance to those people who work in wetlands, that you make the compensation should be in kind, not out of kind. So while it's tightened up the sub-basin part, it has loosened up the part on the in kind. And that is not good either. So I would, at the appropriate time, I will make my motion as I started to outline before.
So I'm looking at the agenda, and it's actually published as
Yeah.
a study session item. And so study sessions, we typically don't take motions on issues. It's to study them and discuss them, but it is helpful to give staff the direction the majority is headed in, so we'll continue the discussion, but I don't think it would be in order to be taking motions during the study session. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, you're correct. I guess what I was hoping to come out of this was to be able to go to the public hearing and more important, the public opens house with at least a pretty strong direction from the board about how we're going on these issues. But we can certainly go into public hearing and to the public open house with some options on the table.
And the other thing that's helpful when we're trying to wordsmith, if we can give staff their proposal ahead of time, if you think that, we're missing this word or that word, it'd be helpful if we could get that back to staff as a proposal, and then it could be circulated to all the board members before the meeting so that we could see what others are thinking before we have to make these last-minute decisions on the dais here. So if you do have alternate language, it'd be good to put that forth to staff before the meeting if you can. David hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah, I guess my take, just a quick overview, make sure I'm understanding it, and I think Amy can give me a nod if this is right. The three options really here are that leave as is, and that leaves the city's hands tied. It's unlikely to be able to use a fee in lieu unless something changes where they become a sponsor. The first proposed change was just changing to the city approved, which doesn't mean that they have to approve it, but it gives the city the flexibility. So you could still retain control and say, we don't want to do this, it's too far away. Or we could recognize the benefit that, hey, we're going to team with these three other cities and do a good project. It adds that flexibility. And then the second one to me is more of a larger change where we're saying, that would be the board here saying, we want to change something from the past, and now we're going to add a new limitation that you can't go outside of the sub-basin, whereas there were conditions in which you could prior, or currently.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess my leaning, kind of for the scope of the amendment that we're doing now, I feel like the word change to approved is in line with the existing Shorelines plan. I think it was a good change to give the flexibility, but not to mandate that the city accept other programs. And it's definitely a larger discussion if we're going to really change where we're looking, the footprint and where we can do mitigation. And that might be something for the future, the next round as well. So that's my piece.
So,
I'm in agreement with David on that.
so you're saying, your preference would be option one, and perhaps defer something like option two for a future?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I guess my preference would be more like Ann's talking about, that really what we want to do is say that Bothell is trying to get its house in order. And that means that as Bothell continues to grow, we will take care of our watersheds. And, we're not going to be in the business of helping other communities take care of their watersheds. I think there may be times where that policy could come back to haunt us. For example, I think with Swamp Creek, there's an area in Kenmore that is in desperate need of restoration, and getting that work done would make the part of Swamp Creek in Armuga, much more relevant to salmon recovery than it is now. There are also things like, we think we need a lot more rearing habitat for Chinook salmon. So if somebody's degrading spawning habitat, the Chinook may come out ahead in the short term by having more rearing habitat put in place to replace it. But ultimately, we're going to need more spawning habitat and more rearing habitat. So, my guess is it's not going to be better in the long run to start sacrificing areas to do mitigation elsewhere, that we really need to, start improving what we've got here. And other communities, we would like them to be doing the same, but if not, if they want to help us get our house in order, that we should welcome that assistance. So that's kind of the direction I'd like to see it go.
Ann?
Thank you, David, for phrasing that so well. I agree with you, too. And when I appeared before council last Tuesday, I pointed out the statement in the WIRA 8 document for Chinook recovery, which says that lethal and sublethal temperatures in the Ship Canal and the Sammamish River during adult migration are considered a key constraint to recovery. So I feel, yes, maybe in the future we might be looking at the city of Bothell going outside, but we have such critical need here, right here in the city, that I cannot imagine why we would want to go outside the city boundaries when you've got such a desperate need here, particularly along the Sammamish River, to do something here. That is one of my real concerns. I can't imagine why you'd want to do it. So.
Sarah?
I'm going to argue for Amy's language. The reason why I like it is because that focus on the sub-drainage basin is very specific, and it gives a clear direction to whoever's reading this what kind of things we want. My question for Amy is, are there examples of sub-drainage basins that cross city lines? I do want to take into account what Dave was saying. There might be great projects that involve a different city.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to keep track of options here. So option 0, stay the same, still leaves opportunities for out of drainage basin and out of city mitigation, which, okay. All right, so that's that. And then option 1, all it does is leave those same opportunities for out of drainage basin, out of city available, except for in lieu fee, which is now limited only to city sponsored. But you could still go out of drainage basin in a variety of circumstances once you've gone through the process. On option 2 is the only one that limits all mitigation to the same drainage basin. I don't think, and I'd have to maybe read my wording more carefully, that we'd necessarily limit to in the city, though. Thinking about Swamp Creek is a good example, as being partly in the city or the Muga or whatever it's called, and then ending up going through Kenmore. And Kenmore is another city that's also thinking about opportunities to work with King County potentially and leverage some of that in lieu fee and get a site at Lower Swamp Creek. So I don't know how far along that is, but that's something they're talking about. And I think it'd be probably really beneficial to the ecosystem in Swamp Creek and Sammamish River if impacts in the city of Bothell, if they were mitigated in Swamp Creek and Kenmore. I think that would probably ecologically be a really good decision, even though it is outside of the city limits. So one thing I wanted to mention too, just as maybe a cautionary note related to the back nine of the Wayne Golf Course, and you'd have to look at what the conservation agreements or easements or titles say, but many of those types of documents don't let you use those sites purchased with conservation dollars to serve as mitigation. So that might put at least some of the golf course out of the running for one of these types of sites, but other parts that were city owned prior to that then wouldn't be such an issue. But so you might need to look for other places in the city, and I'm sure there's opportunities on North Creek for some of these sites. Another kind of mention too is that this is exclusively talking about wetland mitigation and wetland impact. So these projects should not be, aside from those kind of water quality temperature sort of relationships where maybe it's groundwater supply and the forested wetland cools the water and then it goes into the creek and benefits the system that way. We're not talking about mitigating spawning habitat removal with some other kind of aquatic habitat. And again, on the out of kind question, this is language I took from Ecology's model. Again, it's just supposed to add flexibility, particularly the intent is to further salmon recovery, really is what it's driven by, so that in the event that you're impacting maybe a pasture wetland or something, you don't need to create an emergent wetland when you're like, what would really be awesome is if we created some riparian wetland with large woody debris and those types of things. So I think that's what the driver and the original thought was behind that opening up of flexibility for out of kind, was to allow for those types of circumstances and not, so you don't have to recreate the same lesser value aquatic habitat when you could do a lot more for salmon if it were out of kind. So that's the thought. That was the thought there. Okay. Did I answer the actual question? Sorry. Yes. Okay.
At the risk of raising a whole other can of issues, one thing that that staff has grappled with, and I did want to recognize that the Planning Commission Chair, David Vliet, is also with us today. Planning Commission is going to be tackling similar issues in Title 14, the critical areas regulations, starting Thursday or Wednesday. So they're going to be doing a study session Wednesday, sort of to get up to kind of speed with where you're at with this issue. The efforts need to be coordinated, but they don't necessarily have to be the same. These kinds of issues can be handled differently in the citywide critical areas regulations as opposed to the shoreline regulations. And I think when it first came up, I mentioned I had in mind one site with a fairly small, low-value wetland that we had considered as a candidate for off-site mitigation, partly because this small, low-value wetland was really prevented much other use of it. But that was not in the shoreline jurisdiction. The only one that I can think of or have been able to uncover where there has actually been a proposal by the property owner to do off-site mitigation is this property along the Sammamish River, which has a fairly decent-sized wetland and probably I wouldn't call it a low-value wetland, certainly, right in the middle of the site, so making it very difficult to develop. And it is separated from the Sammamish River by the Sammamish River Trail, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't, that there's not a hydrological connection there at all. So that proposal didn't go anywhere, and there hasn't been a proposal for this property that has risen to the level of seriously considering any offside mitigation. Again, the code is significantly limits that, but this is the only one I could think of that an example, a real world example of where this code might come into play. So I just thought I'd share that.
Ann?
Yes. Thank you, Dave, for bringing it up. I am quite familiar with this Williams property. And actually, there have been two proposals. The first one was appealed to, and it was ruled as it not meeting the criteria of the Shoreline Master Program in December of 2001. And if you look at the wetland that's outlined on there, you see that there is a connection between it, as shown here. So in the first proposal, which was for a 22-room inn on that site, it was considered as two wetlands, Wetland A and Wetland B, and they were the total wetland acreage on that site. The site was at that time considered to be 1.77 acres, the total site. And the size of the wetlands was, there was Wetland A and Wetland B, both about the same size, but the total wetland site was to be about 11,764 square feet. And the hearing examiner ruled that it was not, could not meet the criteria because it was not in kind. It was not in kind compensation. So then he came forth in December of 2000, again in 2016. This time the acreage was listed at slightly larger, 2.01 acres. And now the wetland was considered at 20,483 square feet. So the wetland had probably connected and had also grown in size. And this is exactly a forested wetland. It is considered associated with the shoreline. So it's obviously considered important, and it is important to the Sammamish River, because if you go just to the east of there, you will see there is another very large wetland that's on just across the way. You want to point it out, Dave? Just down the way. Probably at one point, these were all one wetland before they built the townhouses down there. Yeah. And then, Dave, if you move it up just a teeny bit more to the east, if you get to the next designation, yeah, you'll see that we're going into North Creek comes in just a little ways up there. So there's North Creek. So this is an example, again, of how important this is to have an area, because it's very close to North Creek. The Chinook are coming in, they are pooling and waiting for the in cool water, and then going on up and do go up into North Creek. And this was a site, as Dave pointed out, where he wanted to do an off-site mitigation. And a Department of Ecology, citing the policies in the Bothell Shoreline Master Program that I just talked about, P101, 103, and 104, said, no, you could not qualify. It had nothing to do with sponsoring, whether Bothell sponsored a fee in lieu or not. It could not meet the criteria for going off-site for mitigation. He wanted a site up near Horse Creek. So nothing has happened to the project since then. So, but to me, this is the example of when I look at the wording, I agree with you, Sarah, that he certainly has tightened up the sub-basin part, but I disagree strongly with what I consider a broadening of the in-kind section. That's my concern. And I think we've had a good discussion, but I think we're still missing some parts in terms of information about in lieu and mitigation banking. So,
Can I ask a follow-up question to you, Ann? Do you have a problem with the change from sponsored to approved?
do I?
Yes.
I think I agree it's a little hazy, but I do have a problem with it because I think it does give the city of Bothell the ability to go to another jurisdiction for a fee in lieu program.
Well, I agree with that.
Yeah.
My question is,
I don't have
then you're turning down option 1, 2, and 3.
yeah.
So what is the option you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting it because I think it is, in terms of all three of them, it has more, it has been in place, and I think it has pretty good, but not excellent safeguards. That's why I would like to see us look at it again, if we have the opportunity in 2020 to come back and look at it. That's my thought.
In other words,
Each one has parts that are good, yeah,
make no change for now.
but no change for now. I don't see a crying need to, that's the point. There's no reason, ecology is not saying you have to change this now. You've met the criteria for what we have to do now in terms of what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. And I'm hoping that we've got a year, and if the council chooses to have us look at it, we would have a chance to look at it again with a little more knowledge.
Okay, I guess I'm leaning with you on that. I do feel that approved gives us more meat. As far as the change goes, I definitely agree with some of the soft words and especially around demonstrated is something that can be finessed in many ways. That I'm uncomfortable with I see where you were trying to go with the word changes, Amy, but in combining a couple of things, you've broadened some scope that I'm uncomfortable with. Other than that, I like some of the changes at the end, some in the beginning, but it's the middle that's a little too flexible for me, and I'd lean towards approved, but I'm good with no change or approved.
Amy, it did look like you were ready to respond.
Yeah, oh, yes, I was just gonna chip in a little bit about, I did have a conversation with Ecology to let them know we were having this kind of discussion, and their preference would be to leave it exactly how you have it as well, because again, it provides the most flexibility, actually. It lets you go to mitigation banks, lets you go off-site, out of drainage basin, provided you meet X, Y, Z. I mean, and that's how it's currently written. The only thing that leaving sponsored in does is eliminate options for using an in lieu fee program until and unless the city ever develops, I suspect, its own program, which just because of what's involved in developing an official in lieu fee program, I think you're involved a little bit in King County's in the early stages, and it took them like 6 years or more. They've got 2 full-time staff. It's and granted that's at a county scale, but it's no small effort to put one of these things together. So there's that, and then just a little bit more about out of kind. I don't know if it's not my place to suggest stuff, but maybe just deleting that sentence would take care of it. Again, this is stuff that came from Ecology. I borrowed this language from their current model ordinance, which I think their current model is from 2016. And in the federal government's latest guidance document on mitigation and that sort of thing, they also have increasingly opened the door to to out of kind in certain circumstances, provided you've, explored all the other options and there's a ecological argument for doing out of kind. Same thing with ecology. So those doors are kind of opening up just a little, and I can understand how you'd be uncomfortable with that. But, again, as I mentioned, the whole purpose is to make sure that you're not just stuck with replacing whatever kind of condition you have if you could do better, particularly based on like our really pressing needs for salmon recovery and those types of things. You could do something different that would further that, and that's what the intent is, and that's where we mentioned the watershed goals identified by the city, and as the mayor mentioned too, that the city has adopted or formally signed on to the WIRA 8 salmon recovery plan, and so those were the types of goals and purposes that I was referring to, but I think that's it.
I hear what you're saying. As a practical matter, the fee in lieu has always made me uncomfortable because it seems like a get out of jail free card. You just buy your way out. And I think we've all seen recently some federal changes that seem temporary.
This is a 2008 federal change, which I still consider recent, but it's not this administration.
Yeah, so I came here today, I would have been happy with option 1 or 2. 2 is a bigger change, so I think I didn't have a lot of concern about it. And I think why I started backing off on it was because Ann brought some up that I hadn't thought about. But in general, if we could find a way to get the language, I'd like that it doesn't, what you're trying to do with the in-kind or better concept. I don't have a mistrust of that permit administrators for Bothell are going to say, oh, well, it was this great forested wetland, but we're going to let you make it a drainage ditch, and if there was a way to tweak it to make that more secure, but then I know it's impossible to come up with all the scenarios. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to improve things. Hopeful that this would be revisited in 2020 or soon. That's where I kind of was coming with well, let's add the flexibility. I don't think sponsored is the right word. But I'm not scared of option 2 either. I think that there are some good points, and it definitely brings a more local restriction. I don't feel like it's not important to me to stay within the city boundaries where we put this restoration money, but the drainage basin one is more important. I like how option 2 does that.
Sarah?
I'd be willing to draft a change to option 2 for the next meeting for discussion. Would that be helpful?
I think so.
And I was going to suggest we can take the feedback we've gotten tonight and make some tweaks. And if any of the board members want to make some suggestions, we'll certainly consider those. I would say, since our next meeting is actually, since this was pushed back a couple of weeks, we need those really, I guess by the end of this week, we would need any suggested revisions to give us a time to consider those and repackage them.
Yeah.
So is the thought now that we give comments, including Sarah's? Sarah, can you send, in the time frame that we have, can you send some thoughts around and then let us make further comments to them? Do you have time?
You mean tonight in the meeting? Because we're not going to do it by email because that's a...
Oh, we can't do that.
Yeah, so what I would suggest is you can send your suggestions to me. I'll share them with Amy, and then we'll use those along with all the input we got tonight to bring back something. And then, of course, at that point, at the public hearing, when you do get to deliberations and motions, then you can make other tweaks.
Is there no way that Sarah can send them to all of us?
It gets sticky. I prefer to not get in the sticky gray areas and just, because,
Is there some,
So-
I'm asking an honest question, as long as it
so
goes to
the issue we're
everybody.
talking about is the Open Public Meeting Act,
Yeah.
where there's
So
a
is it supposed to
requirement.
go just, I missed
The
asking.
concern is that it is or has the appearance of being a serial meeting that is conducted via email. So that's why it's better just to avoid sending those to the whole group. And I think we'll have adequate time to consider those at the public hearing. At this point, there was some, I think there was, and may still be a possibility that we'll have the public hearing on March 11th and be able to make decisions, but I think it's more likely that we'll continue it to April.
Another option is to form a subcommittee, right? As long as it's not a majority of the board talking about an issue, a subset can. So if you and Ann wanted to be the committee to work together on the language, that would be acceptable as well. So where it gets sticky is when you start talking to the whole board via email, it can turn into a meeting and then you get in trouble.
I think it might be a good idea for Dave to set a deadline and everybody, if they have an opinion on it, send their own vision, because I don't necessarily want to compromise, to start compromising yet. I think that should be done in the meeting. Everyone put what they think is their ideal on paper, send it in, and then we'll choose between, and we might get some cool words out of that.
So traditionally, wouldn't the deadline be today for 2 weeks before the meeting, if it's on the 11th?
We'll finish the packet for that meeting next week, so if we get it by the end of this week. And what I'm proposing is not that we'll wind up with 5 options, one from each other or whatever, but that we will take all that input and synthesize that into these 3 options, or if it seems like there's a 4th one, we can do that too.
What's the timeline again?
Well, the sooner the better, if you have specific wording changes, but no later than the end of the week, and then we'll be issuing the packet mid part of next week, the packet for September 11th.
March 11th.
March 11th, yeah. Jumping way ahead.
I will not be able to make the end of the week. I can make it by Tuesday or Wednesday. We have a major family celebration that's coming up for my husband's 80th birthday, and I am completely booked. But I'll be glad to offer, but I'm just, there's no wiggle room right now.
And all options for changes, tweaks to the language can be made at the hearing too. So
Yeah.
it's not your final chance. So
So I can get it to you early next week.
So David, does that bring us to the end of the study session item then?
I think it does.
Okay. So now we go on to, everybody okay with moving on to the next item? Okay. Old business, report on council decision to consider removing or altering the buffer reduction provision. So we've already touched on this. Is there anything further?
I think we pretty much covered that now. So I think we can move on to the final item here.
Mayor, did you raise your finger or?
Check mark.
Check mark, okay. The next item then is plans for March 11th open public house in coordination with the Planning Commission and the Park and Recreation Board.
So, as we've discussed previously, one reason I invited Planning Commission, no, down the road, sorry. I'm passing out a flyer that our consultants just finished this morning for the March 11th public open house. And there are more on the table back there, so feel free, if you have access to community bulletin boards, to take them and post them. We'll be posting them on the city notice boards, as well as getting word out to all the parties in the public participation plan for outreach in advance of that public open house. And then the current thinking is that we will set up the open house, whatever displays we have, in this room, and then just transition directly into the public hearing. Although there's also the possibility that we could use 107, 108, and then move into the council chambers for the public hearing. And as far as coordination with Planning Commission and Parks and Recreation Board, I think I've said at previous meetings, rather than holding joint hearings, we'll do the coordination by inviting representatives from those boards, up to 3 representatives from those boards to participate in your meetings. And I wanted to take this as an opportunity to invite Shoreline Board to choose 1 to 3 members to attend the Planning Commission's hearing on this Wednesday, if you can handle 2 meetings. I don't think it's I don't think it's essential that it happens, but then they will be holding a public hearing on the critical areas regulations that are related to some of the changes that you've been making on March 20th. But I'd certainly be interested to know if there were any members that would be inclined to attend the Planning Commission study session this Wednesday, and I would ask that you let me know if you do intend to come, so that we can avoid having a quorum.
Dave, what time is that meeting? Is it at 6 p.m.?
Starts at 6, and the study session, there's also a public hearing on small cell wireless that will happen before the study session on the critical areas amendments. So I would guess that it'll probably be 7:30 before we get to the critical areas issues.
So do we have volunteers who want to volunteer to go?
Oh, and I meant to say that the other option is those are actually broadcast on BCTV, so you can watch it live, and you can watch recordings of it following, just as you can watch the recordings of this meeting afterwards.
I may be able to make it, but I have a meeting in downtown Seattle that ends around 5, so time would be undetermined.
I do hope someone can attend, but I'm obviously out for this week, so.
I haven't been to a planning commission meeting in a long time. I'd be interested in going if I don't have I've been working a lot of second shifts, so that's what I'd have to work it around my work schedule. I'd attend if nobody else can make it.
So it looks like 2 maybes, which is safe. And so both of you are welcome, and you can download the packet off the website, but I'll make sure that you both have that packet.
And I'll add, I'm also, would be a maybe, but I
Okay.
will let you know
Okay.
if that comes up, so that we don't mess up.
Good.
And David, did you want to say anything? Okay. Thank you, Patrick. I was just asking David Vliet, who's the chair of the Planning Commission, if he had any words for us. And he didn't, since he was not on microphone. Okay, that is the end of the item 7. 8, reports from staff.
None.
Reports from members.
Maybe I've got.
David Bain, you don't have any? You always have so much reports to go on, but okay. Then that's bring us to the end of our agenda. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, I can't think of the word.
Would you like me to
Entertain.
make a motion
There we
for
go.
adjournment?
Yes,
I motion for adjournment.
Second?
motion by member Orr, second by member Cox to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We are adjourned.